In 1954, Marina Chapman was almost 5 years old. She's not sure where she was, maybe Colombia, maybe Venezuela, but she was abducted. A man put chloroform over her mouth, and she went unconscious, and she woke up over his shoulder running through the jungle, him and another guy, the two of them, and they were running like they were being chased. She didn't know where she was, and after a little while, they couldn't outrun whatever it was, and they just threw her into the bushes and took off. So there she is. She's, not even 5 years old. She was close to close to being 5 years old. That's how we know how old she was, because she was looking forward to her 5th birthday, so it wasn't that far away. And there she is in the jungle. Doesn't know where she is, doesn't know what to do. And she started just climbing around in the jungle, trying to find something. She was just wandering aimlessly and getting thirstier and hungrier as time went on. But it was difficult to move through the undergrowth. It was very tangled with vines and stuff. And she couldn't really sleep at night because she was so scared. She heard all these weird animal sounds and things moving around in the bushes around her. So she was really tired. She was really hungry. And on the 3rd day, she came to a clearing. And she was so tired, and she felt kind of safe in this clearing, safer anyway. And she just laid down and went to sleep. And when she woke up, she was surrounded by a bunch of monkeys looking at her. She didn't know what kind of monkeys they were at the time, but we now know they were Capuchin monkeys. And there was about 30 of them, and they were staring at her. And she didn't know what to do. She was just a little kid and was kind of scared. So she didn't move, and she just looked back at them. She was still lying down. Or no, I think she sat up. Yeah, she sat up. She sat up and she was looking at them, and they were looking at her. Finally, one of the bigger males comes over and shoves her, and she fell over onto her side and stayed there. And then he went back to the group, and then later another male comes over and kind of pushes on her. And eventually they all start coming over and touching her and like grabbing her hair and squeezing her and pushing her. And she just laid there. She didn't know what to do, so she just laid there scared. And then eventually I think they must have realized she wasn't a threat to them, and they just started leaving her alone. And she felt safer being there. This clearing area was kind of like their territory, so that's where they lived. And she felt safer being near them than she did out there on her own. So she just stayed there instead of continuing her traveling aimlessly through the bushes. She decided to just stay there for a while, and she just started spending her time watching them. And she was hungry. She was really hungry. And so she really was paying attention to what they were eating, because she didn't know what to eat. She didn't know. Looking from her perspective, it looked like there was nothing really edible. So she hadn't eaten anything. And she saw them eating like these little banana-like things, fruits. And so she ate some, and it was actually really good. And then she saw they broke open nuts and ate those, and so she did the same. And she just started watching what they were doing. They would sometimes grab a lizard and just gobble that down, but she couldn't bring herself to do that. So she just kind of stayed on a vegetarian diet. And she ended up staying there with them for 5 years, till she was 10 years old. Many of these monkeys became her friends. She would groom them, and they would groom her. going through her hair, trying to find lice and ticks, and maybe not ticks, lice and fleas. So she would groom them looking for fleas and lice, and they would do that to her. And she had both. Looking back on it now, she knows she had a really strong desire to learn to speak to somebody. And so she started noticing that they actually made sounds to each other and that actually meant something. Like there was an alarm call and different kinds of alarm calls and other kinds of sounds that meant something. So she learned to make those sounds and learned to know what they meant. So in her that's right around the time that kids are really deeply committed to learning language. And she learned monkey language, and she knew how to speak it by the time she was 10 years old. At one point, an older monkey, the oldest monkey, like the granddaddy monkey of the troop, was always watching her, and she didn't know if he was friendly watching her or curious or if he was suspicious of her. She couldn't tell. But she didn't have much interaction with him until one day she ate what she thought was a bean pod that she'd eaten before. It's called tamarind. It's like a little bean pod, and she didn't have them before. But this one looked just like a tamarind bean pod, but it wasn't. It was something toxic. So she ate it, and she got really a bad stomach ache and felt really, really sick. And she's kind of like doubled up on the ground, really not feeling good at all. And the old granddaddy monkey comes over to her and pushes her. And eventually she realizes he's trying to push her in a particular direction. And she was in no state to resist, so she just went along with him and let him push her to this little pool of water where there was a waterfall. And then he grabbed her by the hair and pushed her face under the water, in the stream of water. And so she thought, okay, he wants me to drink. So she drank a whole bunch of water. And then when she got out, she suddenly got really sick and puked. And then he pushed her back into the water and had her drink some more water. And then she eventually recovered. And ever since then, from that point on, he was kind of a friend of hers. At 10 years old, she was found by a man and a woman who were out in the jungle hunting. And she at first was just hiding from them. And then she decided, because there was a woman, she felt like maybe she would not just shoot her or whatever. So she presented herself, crawled out from behind a tree. But at this point, she was no longer really like a human. She didn't speak any human language. She moved on all fours like a monkey. And she had dreadlocks, long dreadlocks down past her butt. She didn't have any clothes on, and she was filthy, hadn't obviously washed herself in 5 years. She came up to the woman and reached out her hand in a really submissive way. And when the woman touched her hand, she knew that they were going to let her go back with them. And they did. They walked, and she followed them. And unfortunately, they drove her to a town and sold her to a brothel. And she eventually, what I've told you so far is not even, I don't even think it's a fourth of the book, but the rest of it all takes place in quote unquote civilization. But at one point, she was kind of a street kid, just living on the street in Colombia somewhere. And she was captured by the police. And when they were questioning her, and and they were asking her where her parents were. She didn't know where her parents were. And they said, well, who has raised you? And she told them, a troop of monkeys. And they laughed at her and didn't believe her, of course. And I mean, they were actually a little bit angry with her for bullshitting them like that. And so she never again told anybody her story until eventually later, when she had children of her own. She would sometimes share things, like something would remind her of one of her monkey friends, or something would remind her of the jungle. And so little bits and pieces of the story came out over time. And eventually, when her daughter was older, she started writing down the story and piecing together the story. And then they eventually hired a professional writer to write the story. And it's just incredible that a 5-year-old made it and survived just by she said she remembers her mom saying a phrase, monkey see, monkey do. And so she was doing that. She was just watching what the monkeys did and did that and was able to survive. She probably didn't get enough protein though, because even as an adult, she's only 4'9". But she survived. If you want to read the rest of the story, the book is called The Girl with No Name, and her name is Marina Chapman. This is Adam Lee Kahn on the Atom Bomb.